project is one that I've been working on for quite a few years now as a part of the honors program at Marymount. So my final project, as it shaped up, is imagining the artist's images of Virginia Woolf in modern narratives. So this is the short version of my much larger project. So there are going to be a few sections here that I skip in favor of time. But in general, my thesis argues that several major adaptations have fundamentally shaped the way Woolf's media image is represented and perceived by postmodern audiences. So the four texts that I examined, they all contribute their own rewritings to Woolf's pluralistic, fragmented icon. And the term plural is very key to analysis. Finally, although this iconicity is plural, these adaptations also show that the Hollywood image of Woolf as artist, as I call it, has begun to dominate popular perception. So it acts as a self-enforcing, deceptively unified image of Woolf that will continue to influence her iconicity. So to kind of start off with, Virginia Woolf, I'm assuming most of you have heard of her because she seems to be a very popular artist. I've had some really interesting dinner party conversations about Virginia Woolf. She's always been one of the most famous British modernists, but for some reason she's remained an object of fascination far past her death. And so in the past year or so, she's experienced a surge of popularity. So Woolf is very famous for her stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is a technique that requires indirect third-person narration that focuses on the subjective self, rather than narration that advances the plot. So this technique allows the reader to be inside a character's head without the need for dialogue. This technique is more capable of representing plural or complex selves than just hearing someone speak through dialogue, which is really fascinating to read. So Woolf does this in her work, most notably in these novels. However, it's a little tricky when you start talking about Hollywood. So here's how Hollywood codes for that. So classic Hollywood narrative style cannot represent all of these complex selves from stream of consciousness in one visual image because Hollywood media requires that there be stable external images that you see. It's not like when you watch a Hollywood film, you can get inside the character's head. That's impossible given the media. And so all of these different narratives are required to condense themselves or be obliterated entirely in favor of one unified image. So visual mediums need these stable external images. And in my research, these most often are Woolf's suicide, her nose, and her artistic talent or her status as an artist. And these are actually, I included these images because this was from a fashion spread in the magazine Vice, which was removed from their website, but it's a fashion spread with women in fiction, portraying all of these authors who committed suicide in a fashion piece. So it was objected to enough that it was removed, but here we see Virginia Woolf. And her counterpart, Sylvia Plath. They're very often included. However, in my thesis, I argued that Woolf's iconicity is actually constructed from a larger set of associations, emerging out of fragments that tend to mutually constitute rather than compete within cultural perception. So, let's explain that a little bit. So her iconicity is not stable because it is plural and fragmented. And in this graph, I tried to show you, although it doesn't really come close to actually explaining this, but I show you how all of these different adaptations, and these are the four that I examined in my thesis, but all of these dotted lines represent other adaptations that could all trickle down into this overall idea of Woolf's iconicity. This, as I said, doesn't come close to it. It would probably be far more complex. It would probably be three-dimensional if I was trying to represent it accurately. But it gives you a sense that Woolf's identity is really not just the hours and the cohesion, or not just Elizabeth Taylor and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's far more complex than that. The adaptations that I discussed in my thesis are Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the play by Richard Albee, and the adaptation film with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And I also discussed The Hours, the novel by Michael Cunningham, and the film directed by Stephen Daldry. So I argued that the play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and The Hours, the novel, so the sources for these adaptations, reject the idea of this romanticized Woolf as artist. So they kind of play with this idea, and then they reject it at the end of the narrative in both cases. However, what was really interesting that I found is that their film adaptations do not, even though the film adaptations are very similar to their sources. So this is because I found of the celebrities. So Elizabeth Taylor and Nicole Kidman, because they kind of represent Woolf in these films, they start to embrace this idea of the romanticized artist because of the celebrities. So Taylor and Kidman are praised for becoming ugly for the sake of art in all the reviews associated with the film. Not all of them, but many of them. Even by Albee. And so that I argue that this romanticized image of Woolf is actually reinforced in the films, even when the authors of the original sources of the films reject that image. So I say it paradoxically because Woolf is the means by which Woolf and Taylor, or Taylor and Kidman, transcend this idea of tabloid stardom, so they become more than, they become ugly, so they're not just young, beautiful celebrities who are just on the cover of these tabloids, but they become artists. Woolf also becomes a celebrity, so I've nicknamed this celebrity by osmosis. And because of the attachment to celebrities, Woolf ends up having more staying power because of these narratives. And thus, the Woolf as artist narrative has more staying power. So while Albee and Cunningham recognize this plurality and criticize singular narratives of Woolf as artist, Hollywood cannot do that. And because these Hollywood films prioritize celebrity, Kidman and Taylor endorse this narrative inadvertently. So finally, few of these individual representations of Woolf's image successfully encompass the plurality present in her narratives. However, the fact that multiple images exist, so the fact that there are all these adaptations, and there are even more than I examined in my thesis, the fact that they exist in postmodern culture demonstrates that her iconicity is more plural and fragmented than individual adaptations would suggest. And in my thesis, I tie this to Woolf's stream of consciousness. So we see the complexity present in Woolf's stream of consciousness in her representation as an icon. And so each fragmented narrative or representation, I argue, is part of a cycle of solidification. So every time this image is repeated, so every time the Woolf as artist narrative is repeated, it solidifies this image, which means that although Woolf's iconicity will change in the future because of the many narratives informing it, right now it has a lot of staying power because of these Hollywood films that capture it with celebrity. So these single stories never create a definitive narrative of Virginia Woolf, regardless of how dominant an image would seem for a time. Rather, each new portrayal is a fragment fragment that feeds into a cultural perception of Virginia Woolf's The Icon. Give it here.